The wind laid a low, steady moan across the Mersey as stevedores worked by lantern light, and the big side-wheeler eased away from the pier. The date was January 23, 1856. Liverpool clocks showed near midnight. On the saloon deck of the Collins Line steamer Pacific, passengers watched the harbor fall behind them, gas lamps dwindling to a smear, while the ship's broad paddles beat a slow rhythm and the funnels pushed cinders into the damp cold. Trunks rattled on lashings. A steward shut a skylight against the spray. In the chart room, the master ran his finger along the familiar Great Circle track to New York, tapped distances he'd crossed a dozen times, and noted rumors of heavy weather west of Ireland and drift ice on the banks. It was the same route their fleet had made its name on: fast passages, American swagger, and silver service afloat. 2 winters earlier, another Collins ship had left American waters and not come back. The Arctic, pride of the line, collided with a smaller vessel in fog just south of Newfoundland in September 1854. She took hundreds with her, women and children among the lost, while surviving accounts swore that lifeboats had been seized in panic. Newspapers in New York published casualty lists and diaries recovered from the sea. The owners offered condolences and explanations. British editors called the line reckless. In offices along South Street and across in Liverpool, men who watched steam push sail off the Atlantic wondered if speed had become a form of bravado. The Pacific's departure in 1856 was supposed to be an answer. Crews checked safety drills with more formality. The company's clerks sharpened their pens and promised that schedules would be kept without gambling against fog. In cabins trimmed with deep carpet and walnut, passengers wrote quick letters for the mailbag. A brass bell rang for midnight watch. The pilot boat cast off, and the ship took the Irish Channel under a sky without stars. By morning, the sea had a hard, gray look. The barometer fell in a slow curve. In the engine room, men wiped oil from the Stevenson linkages and listened for any change in the beat. A steward carried dry toast and coffee along the passage, while canvases were lashed tighter across the promenade. The ship took wind abeam through the afternoon, then head on by night. The lamps swayed and the funnels sang. On the second day, passengers gave up on the idea of deck air and sat in the saloon instead, where someone read aloud from a newspaper only 2 days old, and a violinist tried to play over the racket of the paddles. The captain had the log brought to him and entered bearings that put them running well to the west of Fastnet, making a conservative southing before the swing toward the banks. A westbound Atlantic packet was seen that week close to the same longitudes. Crew on that vessel later told of a sea stripped white by gusts and of floes reported down from the north, sliding far south for January. The banks of Newfoundland, the broad underwater shelf where warm and cold currents met, could take on a gloom of perpetual dusk even at noon. In winter storms, the air filled with brine and needle spray that froze to railings faster than a man could chip it clear. Ice reports came through captain's gossip in port, and the government circulars forwarded to company offices. But on a black horizon at 14 knots, reports were stories, and the lookout's eyes were the only proof. No further sighting of the Pacific reached any port. The liner carried passengers, crew, mail, and a hold's worth of commercial cargo common to the route. Bales, casks, and crates lashed in place forward of the boilers. Her paddles were boxed in handsome timber housings lettered with her name. Her cabins could seat 100 to supper on good nights. The weight of her reputation and the shadow of the Arctic's loss made her non-arrival more than one ship overdue. It felt like a verdict on an idea, the idea that the Atlantic could be scheduled like a railroad. In New York, days ticked past the expected time of landfall. The Collins Line office kept a slate at the door for inbound notices. Clerks erased and rewrote the word due until the chalk dust turned to paste. Families came up the stair to ask if anything had been signaled from Fire Island. The answer, each morning and evening, was no. Pilots who waited off Sandy Hook had seen nothing but winter haze and the lights of rival steamers. A week late became 2. Owners petitioned the Navy for any word from patrols. None had any. British authorities posted bulletins in Liverpool and Queenstown. A rumor started. Someone had seen a vessel answering to her look roll heavily in a gale west of Ireland, but the rumor did not attach to a name or a date, and the ocean swallowed it. Searches in that era were more prayer than geometry. Captains outward bound were asked to keep an eye to the northing of the regular track for broken boats or painted name-boards. A few splinters did wash ashore that winter, planks and barrel staves that could have come from any ship. From time to time, newspapers printed the claim of a fisherman who said he'd found a door or a trunk lid with the ghost of a letter painted on it. No piece was traced to her conclusively. There was no bottle with a signed last note. Shipping registers scratched off the names of those listed on her passenger roll and wrote, "Believed lost," in the margin. Back in Liverpool, the quay where she'd taken departure filled again with coal smoke and noise as other ships made their turnarounds. A merchant who had waved a handkerchief that January night found himself returning to the wharf out of habit, unable to shake the image of the paddles lifting and dropping as the ship darkened into the Irish Sea. Across the Atlantic, insurance men counted the value of hull and cargo, and senators in Washington asked why the American subsidy that kept the Collins Line in competition with Cunard should continue when, in 4 years, the company had put 2 ships beyond recovery. Employees said the loss would have come to any line that winter. The House debated. The subsidy was reduced. Creditors pressed. Within a few seasons, the line that had promised to run faster than its British rival was trimmed to skeleton service. What happened on the water is the kind of question that looks simple on a chart and becomes impossible in a gale. If she struck ice on the banks at speed, the blow could have stove in a compartment and jammed the paddles, leaving her side on to green water breaking over the guards. If a sea carried away a paddle box and the wheel, the ship would have yawed hard, exposing windows and doors meant for spray, not for a wall of water. If her engines failed, wind and drift might have pushed her into flows she could not turn from. Night made each of these more likely, snow blinded the lookouts, and a single hour could have carried her past any hope of launchable boats. Wooden steamers lived on the margin between innovation and fragility. A fracture or a shifted cargo in a storm could become a death sentence before watch was relieved. There were other theories, each with its own advocate. Some officers who had crossed that month swore it was not ice so much as the freak build of the sea, those steep, breaking seas that came off the banks like stone walls. One suggested fire, a coal bunker hot enough to ignite, the crew fighting it until the flames reached a hatch and took the ship in minutes. Another pointed to hull fatigue, planking and fasteners punished by years of high-speed service in all seasons, arguing that the rush to outpace competition had quietly shortened the life of the fleet. None could be proven. The Atlantic keeps its evidence. By spring, the missing ship had become a line in annual summaries. Departed Liverpool, not heard from, presumed lost with all hands and passengers. The list of names in British and American papers ran long enough to fill columns: families, clerks, craftsmen, a few with titles, several children. Clergymen preached on the limits of human craft. Engineers argued for stronger bulkheads and better subdivision. Sailors along the battery watched the river traffic and said the sea had simply taken its due. The company went on a little while longer, then drew down its blinds. The story persisted because of what happened first. The loss of the Arctic had shocked the public and dirtied the line's name with allegations of cowardice. 2 years later, the Pacific vanished on the same route, with no cries heard and no trace found. It was easy to stack the events and call it a curse. But curses do not read weather or charts. What the two disasters shared was a corridor of ocean that punished haste, a season that turned spray to iron, and a business model that measured success in days shaved from a passage. When the tide lifted the next generation of iron ships, men pointed back to that hard winter and said the cost of speed had finally been tallied. In Liverpool, where the ship had slipped into darkness that January night, the dockhands who had taken her lines remembered the quiet after the last hawser dropped, and the way the paddles took the water with a confident thrum. In New York, where she never came, the pilot boats kept their winter watches and scanned the horizon each dawn just the same. Somewhere beyond the banks, a storm had its way, and the paddle boxes with her name upon them sank without floating free. The chart room log closed on an entry made mid-ocean, the last one anyone would write. The Atlantic closed over the decks, and the route kept on without her. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.